If he's okay with it, why not use him to test these prospects?
Hey, I was gonna say, what if you have him fight the winner of Delete Zain Vittoria on March 15th? Welcome back. It's the MMA Outsiders episode 115. My name is Zain Bando. To my right is Pat, Danna. And today we're going to go over everything in the world of mixed martial arts as February is drawing closer and closer to a close. We only have about 9 such days left or so from when this episode is coming out. Pat, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good today. It's been a pretty wild day of MMA so far.
It has. But before we get into talking about the everything in the wild world of MMA, specifically the wild day of MMA, as you just put it, I would like to give a few reminders. So please be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. You can do so youtube.com/ETB Network. We're very, very close to hitting 1,000 subscribers. So if you could please hit that subscribe button, please hit that like button. It would be very, very much appreciated. Of course, my name is Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for MMA Knockout, and of course, Pat on my right is a Combat Sports UK journalist and a content creator and a bit of a jack of all trades. Pat, do you have anything exciting coming up from the content side that people should be looking for?
Just a couple interviews coming up. Nothing too crazy. Just some regular little interviews.
And just as a quick reminder, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever your podcast, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, YouTube Premium, and so much more. So we'd be very, very much appreciated if you guys check that out as well. And I would be remiss if I did not remind everyone that the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. Playback has been a wonderful sponsor to us for about the last year or so. We just did a really fun NBA All-Star Game live stream, and we've got a couple other things in the pipeline as well. Pat, how are you liking Playback so far?
Playback's awesome. It really gives us a lot of freedom and ability to kind of just watch stuff live that we wouldn't have been able to commentate over live while watching it. So I really like the freedom and just abilities we have with Playback.
For sure. And speaking of Playback, without further ado, here we go. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. And of course, as I just alluded to a minute ago, please be sure to join our community. You can do so by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more. With that out of the way, though, Pat, are you excited to talk about UFC Vegas 102 that took place this past weekend? Because I feel like a lot happened.
Yeah, no, a lot did happen on this card. It was a pretty fun card. You know, it had its ups and downs for sure, but I think overall it was a pretty solid card, and it definitely delivered on expectations, I'd say.
Oh, for sure. So I guess let's get right into it. We got the main event of the evening: Cannonier taking on Gregor Rodriguez. Two guys going in opposite directions in the middleweight division ahead of this fight. But Cannonier turned back the clock. We both predicted that Cannonier would win this fight. We thought it was going to be a little bit shorter than what it was. It ended up being a 4th round TKO. What did you think of this one? And how do you think Cannonier fared, given that his last few fights had not gone in his way? In particular, he just kind of, with his stamina and his gas tank and not really being able to find himself, I feel like in this fight he was able to do that.
Yeah, no. So this one sucked, honestly, only because I had said there's no way this fight makes it out of the first 3 rounds, and then it made it 20 seconds into round 4, and Cannonier basically had RoboCop out of there at the end of round 3. So my prediction was so close, but so far at the same time. So I really did want to see this fight end in those first 3 rounds just to validate my prediction. And sadly, I can't really say that it did, even though it was very close. It was a great fight, though. I mean, RoboCop came out with everything he had in round 1, dropped Cannonier twice. He really looked like he was about to put a beating on Cannonier. And then you saw he started to slow down as round 2 came. Even at the start of round 2, he looked a little bit tired. And then round 3 came, and it looked like he might have just been saving some energy, but no, he was tired for sure. And
he was extremely tired.
He went way too heavy for that kill in round 1, thinking that he could get it. And when he didn't, everything just kind of fell apart for him, and Cannonier really just started to take over. The second round was still close, but the third round really showed where Cannonier had taken over, and he looked good apart from that first round. I mean, he looked like Jared Cannonier. Obviously, his chin is a little bit weaker than it once used to be after taking all the damage he's taken. I mean, it makes sense, but I mean, he still rallied back from those 2 knockdowns, stayed alive, and I mean, got a really nice finish over RoboCop in round 4. I think he's in a really interesting spot right now at middleweight because, like he said, he's lost to a lot of the guys in the top 5 that are ranked above him. And like, what's next for Jared Cannonier? Like, where does he go from here? It's almost like it's weird because it feels like retiring off of a win like that wouldn't be the worst thing. He is 40 years old now, but at the same time, after a performance like that, how do you retire?
Right, but given that too, and you bring up a great point, but given all of that attached, though, I think something interesting to look at is, maybe he ends up fighting someone either A, he hasn't fought in a while, or B, someone that's also coming off of a loss. And I think the logical thing to do is actually to put him in there, with Whitaker again to see what he has. Because if you think about it, both guys are on the same trajectory in their careers right now. Robert Whitaker potentially just lost his final opportunity at getting a title shot, and you were just talking about retiring off of a win. I don't know if Robert Whitaker has reinvigorated the retirement discussions yet, but I feel like that's a perfect way to go out for both guys is to have them fight each other, in my opinion.
Yeah, so something like that works. I like the Strickland matchup better than the Whitaker matchup. I think he should fight Strickland in a rematch next.
Wow, you do? How come?
Only because the first fight was very controversial, right? A lot of people were split either way on who had won the fight, and I just think that's a fight that a lot of people wouldn't mind seeing again, especially like you said, a guy coming off a loss. That would be Strickland as well. I like the Whitaker fight for sure. I just feel like Whitaker's in a bit of he's in a weird spot too, honestly. I mean, they're all in a weird spot. Middleweight's in a weird spot in general right now.
Right. Because you can't, because speaking of Whitaker, and you could probably say the same for Cannonier, like, I don't know about you, but if I'm the UFC matchmakers, I'm not giving Cannonier, I'm not giving Cannonier Adesanya after the way Adesanya was just obliterated by Imamov. You can't do that.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I like that one as much. But honestly, we could see, I mean, it's up to Jared and what he really wants at this point. I think he's aware, like it sounded like he was very aware that he's not making another title run necessarily.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think he understands that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then maybe the winner of Anthony Hernandez, Brendan Allen, maybe a Roman Kopylov next. Like, I don't want to see Jared have to fight down in the rankings, but if he's okay with it, why not use him to test these prospects?
Hey, I was gonna say, what if you have him fight the winner of Dolidze and Vettori on March 15th?
Yeah, no, but I could see him potentially fighting a guy like Dolidze next. If Dolidze does win that rematch against Vettori, that fight would make a lot of sense to me. 2 guys who are kind of not close to a title shot, maybe aren't going to get one anytime soon, but they haven't fought yet. They're at the top of the middleweight rankings, and it is an intriguing fight stylistically, Cannonier versus Dolidze, so I wouldn't mind seeing a fight like that next.
So now that we've spoken about the Cannonier side a little bit, obviously a really devastating loss for Rodriguez. The one thing that I'll say is I think Rodriguez needs an ample amount of time off. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think Rodriguez definitely needs some time off after this fight. He not even looked bad. He didn't look bad, but he definitely has some things to work on, especially cardio-wise.
He didn't look himself.
No, yeah, and he kind of just burnt out all his energy in round 1 going for that finish. I mean, if he thought he was going to get it, it's not like he wasn't close. He did have Cannonier drop twice in that first round, but at the same time, that just wasn't, I don't know. I don't want to say it wasn't the right game plan. I just want to say that he he showed enough holes that he has stuff to work on. And after a fight like that, a knockout loss like that, I definitely think he should take some time off and kind of just not reinvent himself, but just refine his skills a little bit. He's not old.
For sure. And I think that that's a good place to segue here. Let's move over now to the co-main event. We had Youssef Zalal taking on Calvin Kattar. I took a shot. I took a dart, if you will, Calvin Kattar, thinking that he would turn up the heat and turn back into a vintage Calvin Kattar. Unfortunately, he was anything but that, losing to just a very, very dominant and ferocious Youssef Zalal in a fight that arguably wasn't entirely all that close, and a fight that Zalal could have easily finished Kattar, but he didn't. What did you think of this fight?
This one was interesting, to say the least. I mean, Youssef Zalal surprised me heavily. I did not think he'd be able to outstrike Kattar with the boxing the way he did. I would say it was like, just on the feet in general, but no, he really outboxed Kattar, which I don't know. You probably remember a couple years ago when Kattar was going to fight Max Holloway, there were arguments that the winner was going to be the crowned as the best boxer in the UFC. And now that fight went from two of the best boxers in the UFC and featherweight to now Calvin Kattar getting pieced up on the feet in the boxing by a ground specialist. Like it kind of surprised me, like it really, like, I hate to say it, but Kattar did not look like himself at all. And I just don't know if he is ever going to return to that at this point, because I mean, I would have never expected Youssef Zalal to cleanly beat him and cleanly outstrike him on the feet the way he did. Kattar couldn't find his head at all. His movement was really good in that fight. Zalal's movement was incredible, but I would have expected Kattar to at least hit him a couple more times, especially before round 3. It seemed like the only time that Kattar really found any meaningful offense was in the 3rd round, when Zalal was clearly just trying to kind of run away and not engage in a fight. He clearly knew he was up 2 rounds and didn't want to risk getting knocked out in the 3rd, which I don't fully blame him for, but I don't know, at least make it a little less obvious that you're not trying to fight, I think Zalal still ended up outstriking him in that 3rd round too. If not, it was very close, which just kind of shows that, like, what happened to Calvin Kattar's boxing, man? Like, it really seems like, I think ever since that ACL surgery, things have been off with Kattar, and I don't ever see him going back to what he used to be, honestly, at this point.
Yeah, I would concur with that. He definitely looks like a shell of his former self. And to be honest with you, kind of sucks seeing him, subjected. And this is no disrespect to the Apex, because I've been there in person. It's an interesting and intimate place to watch a fight. But a guy that used to be a top contender a few years ago being subjected to the Apex is kind of as sad as it gets, unfortunately. So,
yeah, no, it is. And it's not even that he just got subjected to the Apex. He got cleanly outstruck by a grappler at the Apex. You know what I mean? It's like, and I had thought in the fight against Aljamain Sterling that Aljamain did win a lot of those striking exchanges. I know there weren't too many, but I did think Aljamain looked better on the feet. But Aljamain was also a former champion, and with the strong wrestling and him using it, it made things tricky. Zalal really didn't, like, he tried to use his wrestling a little bit, but he never came close to getting Kattar down.
No,
like he didn't scare Kattar at all with his grappling, from what it seemed like. So the fact that Kattar really just wouldn't engage and wasn't able to land on him it was upsetting to say. But then, speaking of those grappling exchanges, Youssef Zalal came out after the fight and first said that Kattar belonged in the Hall of Fame, and then accused him of greasing. So I thought that was weird. One, I don't think Kattar belongs in the Hall of Fame. I'll just say that. And
maybe, but in Hall of Fame's defense, though, do you think Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar is a good entry into the fight wing, though, or no?
If anything, if there was a performance wing, maybe, and it'd be for Holloway, not for him. You know what I mean?
You're right. You have a good point.
And that's the problem with it. Like, that would be the only way. I agree. That would be the only way that Kattar got into the Hall of Fame, but it wouldn't be because of him having a good fight or good performance. It would be because he got his butt whooped for 5 rounds, Right. So that wouldn't even be impressive regardless if it was. So one, I don't think Kattar is a Hall of Famer. And 2, the greasing allegations, really, you won the fight clean on the feet. Why? Like, I know you were mad because you couldn't get him down or whatever, but I doubt Cater greased, and even if he did, it didn't matter. You won the fight on the feet. Why did you have to bring that up after the fact and try to tarnish an already solid performance? Like, Zalal really didn't make any fans with this fight because of the way he
No,
fought in that third round and then the way he acted afterward.
no, I don't think so either. And I think it's almost he almost made the media's job easier because now the media is going to go ahead and criticize him. And unfortunately for him, the criticism at present right now is probably what he ends up deserving. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think he made the media's job a lot easier to judge not only his performance but how he acted after the fight. I think you just put it very, very well that he certainly did not win any fans this past Saturday. But speaking of a few fighters who did, were a couple of other standout performances. Pat, what did you think? What did you think of all of them?
Well, I mean, these three guys, I mean, it was kind of tough to choose three. I like to only choose three so that, we don't like flood anything with information during this segment. But this was kind of tough. There were a couple really solid standout performers on this card, but these three in particular really stood out to me. Walker gets back-to-back heel hook finishes. He's the first heavyweight ever to get, I think, 2 heel hook finishes in general, let alone back-to-back. So that was just crazy in its own right. I think they said there was only, this could be wrong, so I'm sorry if it is, but I think there was only 5 heavyweight finishes ever via heel hook, and now he has 2 of them. So that's crazy. That's just a ridiculous stat, to be quite honest. And I mean, he isn't ranked. I know they didn't give the ranking to him, even though he beat the guy that was in the top 15, but he's right there. I mean, if he's not a top 15 heavyweight, he's probably 16 or 17 after that win. I know he had the bad loss to Lukasz Brzeski, which is bad looking back on it. It aged poorly as well. But at the same time, his 2 back-to-back wins now were fairly impressive enough to the point where he definitely should be getting a ranking opportunity next. And it should be higher than number 15 because he just beat the guy that was sitting at number 15. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Walter Walker fight a guy in the top 10 next.
Yeah, he's not ranked at present because actually the new rankings well maybe these are the old rankings. You can correct me, but Taliesin Teixeira is actually number 15. So I think Walker has to be on the doorstep.
I mean, Taliesin Teixeira got 1 win in the UFC over a guy that was already on a losing streak and got ranked in the top 15, even though Walter Walker finished the guy that was ranked 15. That one didn't make any sense to me, to be honest. As much as I like Teixeira and do want to see him pushed by the UFC, I don't think that ranking makes any sense. Moving on, though, to another very impressive Brazilian performance.
Just as a reminder, Pat, the person that you can blame that you can blame the rankings to is the rankings panel and not the UFC though.
Yes, very much so. But another Brazilian performer that was very well was Gabriel Bonfim. I mean, come on, became the first guy to finish Chaos Williams. Chaos Williams has had some very, very tough fights in his career, and becoming the first guy to finish him, especially in the way he did it, was very impressive. He looked very good in that fight. It might have even been his best performance we've seen from him so far. He looked very well rounded, especially on the feet. And then when the fight hit the floor, he just took Chaos out. It was very impressive. And I think Bonfim is a guy that I know he had the loss to Dalby a little bit ago, but we should definitely keep an eye on him. And then Jose Delgado, I mean, Contender Series guy in his UFC debut, getting the first round knockout, landed that big right hand that sat Conor Matthews down, and then finished with some brutal ground and pound elbows. And he just looked really impressive in his UFC debut. I don't think Matthews was necessarily the toughest debut, but at the same time, he looked good enough that I definitely wanted to point him out because he had a very impressive win on the Contender Series as well.
Yeah, I'm curious. Just given how Conor Matthews looked on looking for a fight about a year or so ago, do you think that the UFC gives him at least one more opportunity, or do you think he might be, or do you think he might be on the chopping block relatively shortly?
Well, I think he's only 0-2, right? He's only 0-2 in the UFC, and if I'm not mistaken, I do think. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe his first fight wasn't short notice, but even if it wasn't, he's only 0-2 in the UFC. I do think they should give him at least another fight. And I mean, if it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. But I don't know if he's warranted being cut just yet. I think he does deserve another opportunity.
Yeah, and speaking of, I was just gonna check that for you. Actually, someone who we're more than likely gonna talk about. Dennis Bazooka was his first fight in the UFC, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that was on short notice.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure.
I could be wrong.
No, I don't think it was now that I'm thinking about it, but still it's 2 UFC fights, I don't think a guy should be cut after 2 UFC fights unless he's been a pitiful performer in both of them. And I mean, he got clipped in this fight, but he looked all right before he got clipped. And the Bazooka fight was fairly back and forth until he got clipped. So I think he should get another opportunity.
Or, or before we move away from UFC Vegas 102, what is your final grade, and are you impressed with your 9-3 record?
Yeah, no, my 9-3 record was pretty solid. I'd probably rate the card like a 7.5, honestly. I think it did pretty good. There were times during the card where I was a bit bored with it, but I do think this card delivered for what it was expected to be. And a lot of the fights kept me fairly entertained. I know people were pissed off about that third round with Yusuf Salal, but I was just so impressed with how he looked in those first 2 rounds. So I thought the card was pretty solid for sure.
Yeah, the card was solid too, and the comeback for me was 6-6. So not a good, not great. Just happened to be a couple over 500. Well, you sir are off to a very hot start to begin the year. So keep it up.
I will.
Your 42-19 record is very impressive. It might be and honestly, it might be one of the best MMA prediction records in the industry. I don't know, but it's pretty good.
I wouldn't know, but honestly, I was shocked when I looked at my record too. I was like, damn, I've been killing it with picks this year. The crazy part is too, I think I'm like, I don't know what it is. I'm pretty sure I have a negative record in main events though. I can't pick main events for some reason, but I can pick all the other fights perfectly fine.
Speaking of, let me answer that question for you. Yeah, you actually do have a negative record in main events at 2-3 versus me. I have a positive at 4-1.
Yeah, no, I have not been able to pick main events at all this year, but every other fight seems to be fine for me. So I guess come to me if you need some prelim predictions.
for sure. So speaking of, we're gonna move on to the other three-letter promotion. We got the PFL. They just announced 3-weight classes. Their brand new world tournament roster is starting to slowly but surely come together before their events get rolling in April. Do you have any thoughts or takeaways of what we've already seen so far and what you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I want to talk about the women's flyweight roster that got announced earlier. It's the same roster as last year. They just took out Dakota and I don't know, was it Lisa Malden or someone? Like it was basically the same as the season last year. They just took out a couple fighters and then added Alora Danna and Diana Avsaragova. Alora Danna was a really solid signing, 7-0 Brazilian jungle fight champion. She was actually a very solid signing for the PFL, but this is just literally the season from last year in tournament form, in my opinion. Like, I really don't know how enticing this is because they took out the biggest star and just made it a tournament. It was pretty weird to me. The welterweight division was pretty solid. I liked seeing guys like Jason Jackson and Umalatov in it, and guys like Andrei Koreshkov, some vets. But I didn't think anything crazy of that welterweight tournament. The featherweight division is what really piqued my interest, though. I liked that tournament a lot. You got guys like Gabriel Braga, Movlid Habulayev, Adam Borix, Jesus Pinedo, Jeremy Kennedy. And then new signings like Tae-Kyun Kim, who's actually a very solid fighter. I really like the featherweight division. I wish that all of the divisions were as good as the featherweight division roster, because I'm not going to lie, welterweight was a bit disappointing apart from a couple names, and the flyweight roster was just disappointing in general because it feels like the same thing as the season last year, and it doesn't really make me very excited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could see that for sure. And I just feel like the more name value you have, regardless of weight class, the better off you are. But it seems to me, based on what you're saying and based on the research that I've done myself, that I feel like if you like a prospect heavy roster of fighters who haven't really made their name yet, I think a bunch of divisions will have that, and it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping so because like I said, the featherweight one was really not the featherweight. The featherweight one was really great. The flyweight one just kind of, it just didn't do anything for me. It's literally like the season from last year. It feels like the exact same roster. And then the welterweight division could be interesting, but I feel like it's not going to be until like the semifinals, depending on those first round matchups. And I just wish they did a little bit better of a job putting better fighters in some of those weight classes. But at the same time, I'm not going to judge until I see their Champion Series cards. I really want to see what they're going to do with these Champion Series cards, which they announced for July. I don't know why the next one's going to be in July. Why wait that long? Couldn't answer that question if anyone was wondering. But I think I'm going to still give some hope that those Champion Series cards are stacked, and that's why the tournaments aren't as stacked, but I don't really know anymore. I really just hope that they announce some of these other weight classes, and I'm excited about some of the names I see in there.
Yeah, and speaking of names that you seem very excited to see, it's also the Ultimate Fighter 33 roster has officially been revealed, and even though the coaches aren't going to fight each other, those coaches being Daniel Cormier and Chael Sonnen, there are some very, very interesting names for both divisions. What did you think?
Well, I actually really liked the Tufts roster announcement. I thought that was really good. Uh, and at middleweight, they had a couple of solid names, solid announcements, or whatever. Oh, my bad. Welterweight. Sorry, it's not middleweight. At welterweight, though, they had some solid announcements. They had some solid names brought in. The flyweight roster is what really got me happy, though. That's what really interested me. I mean, you have guys like Eduardo Chapolin, Ali Adiris, Furkatbek Yokubov, Imanol Rodriguez, like Joseph Morales, the former UFC fighter. That division really made me interested. I really liked that one. The welterweight one is still solid. You got guys like Richard Martins from LFA, who's great, Matt Dixon, Jeff Creighton, Diego Bianchini. You have some solid names at welterweight too, but that flyweight roster, do you remember in past seasons of Tough how they've signed basically like a bunch of guys from the roster, even if they didn't win or make the finals?
Yes.
This flyweight roster screams like 5 UFC signees, no matter what. Like, no matter what happens during Tough, I could see like 5 of these guys easily getting signed to the UFC just because I think they're at that talent level.
I'd say Morales is one of them, right?
Yeah, no, Morales is one of them for sure. And then even Roybert Echeverria, we haven't even talked about. He's a really solid name too. He was on the Contender Series a bit ago. So that flyweight season is incredible. I do not want that to be skipped over. Welterweight leaves a little bit to be desired, but there's still some really solid names on there. I didn't even bring up Cezinando. Cezinando is really fun. He's out in BFL in Canada. He's a Brazilian fighting in Canada, and he's just been a wrecking ball over there lately. So that roster definitely has some fun names, but I'm telling you, flyweight is what we need to look out for, because I could really see over half of those fighters in the flyweight tournament getting signed to the UFC after the season is over, and rightfully so.
And do you think some of them could be ranked within a couple of fights too?
Oh, definitely. I think the UFC wants the flyweight division to have some more flair. You know what I mean? Not because it's boring. It's not boring. It's a great division, but they don't really have a lot of options for Pantoja right now. They don't have a lot of contenders and stuff. Like, they want more rising stars, more prospects. They're going to be getting them in this Tough season. I will guarantee that we will get another contender or two for the title at some point from this season, because seriously, this is a stacked flyweight roster.
Awesome to see. So, with that being said, and with the season being a couple months away, if you were to be, because it appears that you love this flyweight roster so much, who is your A2 early Ultimate Fighter 33 flyweight winner, and why? I'm curious.
It's kind of a basic answer at this point. I really have to get into tape on some of these guys and see how they'd stack up against each other, and then obviously see which matchups end up getting made. But just way too early, I'm going to have to go with Eduardo Chapolin from LFA, the LFA bantamweight champion. I mean, he is sick, and he has been a highly regarded prospect for a long time. Like, not even just a flyweight, but I'm talking in general. A lot of people do think he's a top 20, top 30 prospect in the world right now. And he's been a guy that has has just been making waves for a while. I think I'd have to say he's the favorite going into this, but that's not me saying he's going to win because they have a lot of talent in this division. I do think Chapolin would be the favorite right now if you had to ask me to pick one of them.
That's awesome. Well, we can guarantee that May, June, and July is going to be filled with the Ultimate Fighter content, so keep it locked in. We're going to move away from the Ultimate Fighter now to a couple of major fight announcements that are taking place within the next month or so. We're going to start though with one that was kind of a big surprise, and it was this one. Anthony Smith is finally getting a fight, and it's a fight that he said was completely out of left field. What did you think?
Honestly, funny enough, I was in a group chat where someone had guessed this fight the day before it was announced. They were like, "Oh, Anthony Smith is fighting a name he doesn't really recognize. It's got to be Zhang Mingyang." And I was like, "What?" And then it happened, and I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what?" Like, but when he said that, it made sense because compared to what Anthony Smith said, and just with the state of the light heavyweight division with people that are matchmaked already and not. It did make sense. So it wasn't the biggest surprise just because once he said that, I was kind of like, he might be onto something here. But with that said, this is a good fight. I think it sucks that it's going to be Smith's retirement fight. That's what it's making it seem like. It seems like this will be Smith's last fight.
That's what it appears. Yeah.
Yeah. And it does kind of suck because Zhang Mingyang is a finisher and he's a killer. So it feels to me like the UFC is kind of trying to say, all right, Anthony Smith, thanks for everything you've done. How about you sacrifice yourself for this prospect for us? You know, it's kind of just like, damn, like you couldn't have given him a little bit more of a favorable matchup in his like retirement fight. But with that said, Mingyang also has a lot of questions so far that have yet to be answered. So it is going to be interesting to see if Smith could potentially answer those questions himself and take him out or just beat him in general. It is an interesting fight still. In no way am I saying that Anthony Smith is never going to win this fight, but Mingyang's wins all come by first round knockout. It seems pretty clear what the UFC wants here, and it's for Mingyang to finish Smith in round one and become ranked. So it just kind of sucked to me that they didn't give Anthony Smith a proper send-off, which I thought he could have gotten a guy that, you know, maybe wouldn't KO him in round one if that's how he was going to win. But at the same time, it could be a good matchup.
I could see Anthony Smith pulling a Dominic Reyes and shocking the world, though. So,
hey, I mean, he did it against Vitor Petrino. It's not out of the question here by any means. It's just after what we've seen in Smith's last couple fights, it's clear his will to fight and just he's had a lot going on. Like a lot of things have just kind of fallen off for Smith, and I don't want to see him get knocked out for no reason.
I agree. Speaking of other interesting fights, a few weeks before that one, UFC Kansas City taking place April 26th, but on April 5th, from the Apex, Josh Emmett is going to be fighting Lerone Murphy. This is a very interesting booking because these two, I have a feeling, are just going to sit there and stand and bang. What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting booking because Lerone Murphy isn't necessarily known for his power, but he definitely has power. He is known for his striking, though, you know? Emmett isn't really known for his technical striking. He's known for his raw power. So it's going to be interesting to see if Lerone Murphy can kind of stay away and snipe Emmett from the outside, or if Emmett's going to be able to get in the pocket with him and catch him with something that puts his lights out. Lerone Murphy's been a guy who has been on the cusp of like a top 10 ranking for a pretty long time just because he hasn't lost in general. I was going to say in the UFC, but he hasn't lost in general. He's 7-0-1 in the UFC. So he's a very interesting case because he just keeps winning and he's doing so impressively most of the time. I mean, his last two wins are over Edson Barboza and Dan Ige, but in those fights, it's not like it's a flawless performance every time. He usually is facing some adversity, and in this fight, if he faces any adversity, he's probably going to get his lights put out, you know? So it's going to be interesting to see like how much Lerone Murphy is improving to the point where if he can avoid a guy like Josh Emmett and that power in a fight. I'm very interested for this fight because I think it's a great stylistic matchup that, like you said, should be on the feet for most of it. What do you think about this one?
I like it. I'm just going to say something that's a little ironic. Do you think it's weird that Lerone Murphy just beat, not even a year ago, a longtime UFC veteran and a mainstay in Edson Barboza, yet is still not fighting in packed arenas? It just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, I feel like that guy, if they were to put him on a UFC fight night in an arena, I think people would show up.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. This fight should be in front of a crowd and in front of an arena. I don't love the Apex booking at all, but I do understand if they wanted to make this fight a main event, why they're doing it in the Apex, I guess, because I feel like if this were on a card in an arena, it would probably just be a 3-round fight. So if they do want this fight to be 5 rounds, I get why they're putting it in
No,
the Apex.
I get it too. It seems strange to me, given that these two are primarily fan favorites. Like it's in most MMA pundits' eyes. So I just find it a little bit interesting why this fight is not being given higher regard than what it should.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I think that this fight in front of fans, even if it was 5 rounds in the main event, wouldn't be a disappointment. Even if people were like, "Oh, that's really the main event," they probably won't be saying that after the two of them fight. You know what I
No,
mean?
nope.
So it's one of those. It's
But
one of those.
I guess though, from an Apex main event, the people who are willing to splurge on the very known expensive VIP tickets won't be disappointed.
No, I
So
don't think they will.
it's like how I was treated last October when Royval fought Tyra. But or at least how I feel about this fight, I think it'll be a good one. I think from a name, value recognition standpoint, I think Josh Emmett is a tough out for anybody, and I think that this is one of those prove it to me Lerone Murphy fights, where he was able to, get the biggest win of his career against Edson Barboza, and now this is the UFC's message of saying, okay, if you can beat a guy of that name caliber, here's Shaman, and maybe we'll give you 1 or 2 more big fights before the year is over to see what you really have.
Well, don't forget, he just beat Dan Ige too, so he proved he can beat a caliber of that kind of fighter twice because he did it against Barboza and then Ige too. So he's really proven a lot. He deserved a big fight like this in a main event slot. Like there's no question about it. It's more just let's see what he can make of this. Let's see where Lerone Murphy's going to shine if he is going to shine.
That's true because I can guarantee you, if he wins this fight in the UFC, he goes back to England for a second time this year in mid-July. They'll want him as the main event. I would.
Oh yeah, no, he could easily, if he wins this fight. I mean, the sky is the limit. He could easily headline a card in England, and I think it'd be completely fine
for sure. Who's your early lean on this one? I'm curious. Who do you got?
I do think.
What do you?
I do think Emmett is going to catch him early lean. I do think Emmett will find the chin just because it is 5 rounds too. I feel like it's going to be hard for Lerone Murphy to avoid that power for 5 rounds, but I was wrong about his fight against Barboza, so I could very well be wrong about this one.
I was too. And speaking of fights that you could also potentially be wrong about, it's the latest booking, UFC 313. This one was way out of left field, but I'm excited for Jalen Turner taking on Ignacio Bahamondes, and the UFC main card needed a boost, and this is what they got.
Oh yeah, this is a banger.
For sure. Who do you like in this one? Even though we're like 2 weeks out.
It's a tough one because I mean Ignacio has back-to-back first-round finishes in his last 2 fights, and Turner's a guy that's known for his finishes too. I mean Ignacio, not just his last 2 fights, he finishes a lot of his fights. So it is going to be interesting because a fight like this, in my opinion, is going to go one of 2 ways. It's either going to be a war for 3 rounds, or one of them's getting put out in the first couple minutes, and and it's a tough one because if someone did get put out early in this fight, I don't know who would be. Like I think it might be Jalen Turner. Now that I think about it, it's tough. Ignacio's got a good chin on him. He does not get finished like really ever. So it is going to be interesting to see if Jalen Turner could potentially find a crack in Ignacio's defense and put him down and out. But as of now, with Jalen Turner being 1-3 in his last 4 fights, even though some of those were some close decisions, I still think I'm gonna have to lean Ignacio here. It's gonna be interesting though. I really like this fight because, like I said, it's either gonna be a quick finish or it's gonna be a slugfest. So I would be happy with no matter what. I think the matchmaking here is perfect. I think both of these guys are going to match up stylistically very well.
Yeah, I like Ignacio here too, and I actually like him a split decision, and I think the round that people are going to call into most questions is round 2, but that's my way too early. That's my way too early dartboard pick for UFC 313. So for those of you who weren't expecting something on today's show, there you go. So we'll see how that one goes. Speaking
Yeah.
of other news and notes, apparently Conor McGregor hosted a BKFC Italy press conference this past weekend, and a name that was bizarrely brought up by McGregor was the potential signing of former heavyweight legend Fedor Emelianenko, probably the best heavyweight to never compete in the UFC. Pat, this took me for a loop for sure. And I'm just going to say this. I don't think Fedor needs to be competing in any organized combat sports anymore. So I hope this doesn't happen. What do you think?
I agree with you. I don't know why we need to see Fedor continue to fight. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think it might just be McGregor talking out his ass a little bit. I really don't know. But yeah, I really hope that this doesn't happen because I mean, Fedor's doing really well as a coach. You know, he has his group of fighters and he's doing really well with what he's doing now. I don't want to see him come out of retirement at a really old age and fight bare knuckle, potentially get knocked out. Like, you know, like why?
And not only potentially get knocked out by a guy who in MMA 20 years ago he would have destroyed.
Yeah, he would have destroyed, like no problem. And also, it's just like it could hurt his legacy, you know? Like, obviously not for me, like, I really wouldn't care, but in a lot of casual fans' eyes or just people that don't watch as much, it would probably hurt his legacy a little bit, no?
I would so, and I was lucky enough to watch Fedor at the end of his career on 2 separate occasions. I saw him go 1-1. He beat Frank Mir and he lost to Dan Henderson. And in even those versions of Fedor that I saw in person, pale very similarly in comparison to the version of Fedor that we would get if he were to fight in BKFC. So yeah, I think it's a total disaster. For sure.
If anything, I think Fedor should come back to MMA and do one last fight if he really wants a fight. You know what I mean? Let Fedor come back to his actual sport. Why does he have to go to BKFC?
Yeah, the question would be though is where would Fedor even go?
I'd rather him go nowhere, but if he is going to fight somewhere, I'd rather him actually be able to use his full skill set in MMA, you know?
For sure. Well, speaking of 2 guys who aren't going to be able to use their full skill set in MMA because they're going to be boxing, it's Rampage Jackson versus Rashad Evans over 15 years later, but this time in the boxing ring. This one just Pat, I got to say this. I remember when these two fought in 2010. That was at the peak of my UFC fandom. I mean, I thought that fight was big at the time, but we don't need another repeat of Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz and Golden Boy MMA, and that's what I feel like. That's what I feel like this is.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like this is just something that doesn't need to happen, and I think it's very stupid, to be quite honest. I don't understand why it's happening. I mean, Rashad wasn't even like a very good technical boxer. Neither was Rampage. Neither of them were good technical boxers in that sense. But if anything, Rampage was significantly better on the feet. I mean, when they fought, Rashad needed to wrestle to win that fight and make it ugly and boring, you know? It wasn't really a scrap on the feet. So I don't know why Rashad would even take it.
And then, of course, when Rampage caught him in the 3rd round, we knocked him out.
Yeah, exactly. So it didn't make any sense. This makes no sense to me. It doesn't need to happen. I just wanted to talk about it because it was something that's interesting between 2 MMA legends that are going to be boxing. But
do you think it will eventually, or do you think the Nashville Commission won't sanction it? What do you think?
If the Texas Commission sanctioned Mike Tyson, I mean, anything's possible. Am I right? I mean, seriously, I think it'll happen. Sadly, I'm just hoping that neither of them actually get hurt. I'm hoping it's just a grandpa boxing match. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm honestly hoping it's one of those grandpa boxing matches that doesn't make it to TV, very similarly to the Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva fight. So as few people could see it as possible.
So we actually have some breaking news out of nowhere during today's show. A very, very interesting and pretty fun women's flyweight title eliminator has just been announced between Alexa Grasso and Natalia Silva for UFC 315 in Montreal. So Zain, I would love to hear your thoughts on that matchup now that it's just been announced.
Well, first off, this is the biggest opportunity in Natalia Silva's career. So congratulations to her for fighting a former champion. And for Alexa Grasso, this is going to be one of those fights where she's like, okay, now I have to really go back to the drawing board and I really have to win this one because I don't know if I'll ever get another chance at my belt again. So it's one of those true crossover fights that I think will set UFC 315 apart from a from a good candidate card to a potentially great candidate card, and I think UFC 315 is already off to a solid start, and I think could potentially put it over the edge as maybe a main card opener or the second fight on the main card. I think it's a very, very interesting fight.
Yeah, I do too. And Natalia Silva's UFC run has been nothing short of incredible. I mean, she's been absolutely awesome in the UFC, beating a lot of good names and just has an overall really fun style. She's just a very fun fighter. And fighting a former champion is something that we knew was probably going to come for her soon. Just maybe not this soon. This is awesome to see, honestly. I'm very happy that the UFC made this fight because I think it's incredible matchmaking. I think that Grasso has shown a lot of interesting strides in her wrestling, but she's kept true to her striking, and she's still been a great striker. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how Natalia Silva's wild striking and kind of just like fun kickboxing strikes up against her boxing style. And I think this should be a really fun women's fight where we get a lot of action on the feet.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think this is one of those fights too where now that it's going back to a 3-round fight, I feel like it'll allow Grasso to be less hesitant, considering that over the last year or so she's only ever competed in title fights. So maybe the change of pace will actually help her. And for Natalia Silva, she knows that she'll probably have to take risks, considering that Grasso is dangerous wherever the fight goes. And obviously Valentina Shevchenko found this out, that if Natalia Silva leaves anything open, she's probably going to get submitted or knocked out. Well, I think this is one of those fights where whoever makes the first mistake is probably going to lose.
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredible test for Natalia Silva, and I think it's one that we needed to see her have soon enough. And I also think it's really smart for Grasso because she needed to get a win over a hyped up prospect to get some of her hype back. So either way, whoever wins this fight is going to be gaining a decent amount of hype either back or just in general. So I think it's the perfect fight, to be quite honest. I don't think they could have matchmaked too much better than this.
Yeah, I don't think they could have matchmade too much better than this either. And I think that leads to a perfect segue that this is unfortunately not on the side of matchmaking. It's unfortunately on the side of a couple of retirements now. Bill Algeo and Joe Solecki recently announced the retirement. The one that's going to stick with me a little bit more is Bill Algeo because of his personality, but Joe Solecki was always a stud and always a gamer. You never like to see two guys go out with so much promise remaining in their careers, but sometimes that's what MMA gives us. Unfortunately, what were your initial reactions to these two? And if any, which one were you surprised with more?
I'd have to say Joe Solecki surprised me a bit more because he's only 31. He's not old by any means. So
No,
him retiring is kind of it's throwing in the white flag and saying that this just isn't for me anymore or whatever it is. It kind of feel bad that he retired at 31 years old because he was on a 3-fight losing streak, but he fought 3 really good guys and still had a 5-4 overall record in the UFC. It's not like he was a bad fighter. I just think he kind of had some injuries, had some layoffs, and it kind of just messed with him a little bit. And it just sucks because Joe Solecki he's not the most fun fighter, but he was talented for sure. And then Bill Algeo, I mean, he was 5-5 in the UFC. He was on a 2-fight losing streak with back-to-back knockout losses, but he was on a 2-fight winning streak right before that. It's not like I didn't think he really needed to retire in terms of like his career was done. But at the same time, if that's what he thinks is best, who am I to argue with him? He knows himself a lot better than me.
Right. And who are we to argue? Who is anyone to argue with anyone? If that person knows their body the best, they need to make the best decision for themselves.
Exactly. So it sucks. Don't get me wrong. But if they both felt like retirement was the best option, then I feel it was, because if you're not 100% in this sport, then you might as well be out of it. You have to be fully dedicated to it. And if they weren't anymore, or if they just felt that they couldn't hang anymore, whatever it was, I can't blame them. It's a really trying sport. It really tests people mentally, physically, of course, and just it's hard. It's very hard. So I can't blame either of these guys for calling it a career early. It just does suck.
For sure. I think that's very, very well put. And now it's time to wrap up the show. We got UFC Seattle coming up this weekend. But before we talk about the main and co-main event, let's go over all of the massive changes that occurred on this card almost on a daily basis over the last 2 weeks because a lot happened. So, and I'm gonna let you take it away, and I'll let you give me your kind of biggest overarching surprise on these UFC Seattle cancellations while I display it, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so the big one we had a bit earlier on was that Dominic Cruz pulled out with a shoulder injury against Rob Font. Then sadly, Cruz announced his retirement, so Font was left without an opponent. And then we got a guy like Gene Matsumoto, a very fun prospect, stepping up on short notice to take that fight against Font this weekend. So that was really cool. It is nice to see that, they did get the vet did retire and called it a career, but now they replaced him with a fun young prospect. So that was pretty cool. You had Macy Chiasson pull out against Ketlin Vieira. That fight got canceled. You had Edson Barboza pull out against Steve Garcia. Steve Garcia didn't really get a replacement either. Then for the Adam Fugit Islam Dulatov fight, that thing fell apart completely because you had Adam Fugit versus Dulatov. Dulatov pulls out with an injury. Then you have Fugit versus Goff. Fugit pulls out with an injury, and then Goff is left without an opponent for the card. So it's like, damn, okay. I guess Billy Goff isn't fighting this weekend. And then they announce another fight at his same weight class between Austin Vanderford and Nikolai Varetnikov. So that just threw a whole wrench into it. I don't know what that whole thing was about, but poor Billy Goff got left without a fight. Then you had Antonio Tricoli pulling out against Mansour Abdul Malik. He was replaced by another DWCS guy and Nick Klein. You had Curtis Blades and Rizvan Kuniev rescheduled. And then you had fights like, what was it? Nursultan Ruziboev versus Eric McConico added to the card. And then this card has been crazy. You had guys like Julius Walker, one of the top light heavyweights on the regional scene, getting signed to replace, I don't even remember who he was replacing, Umar Sy against Alonzo Menafield, and then they pushed that fight up a month. This card has just been crazy. It's been chaotic. It's still a good card too, which is the crazy thing about it. It's still a very solid card overall. But how good would this card have been if all the fights just stayed together on it?
I think it would have been one of the better in-person fight nights in a long time.
I do too, but I still think it's a really, really good fight night with really high potential to deliver. I mean, I don't dislike a single fight on this card. It still is incredible. They did a great job repairing this card back together. I don't know how they did it, but they did a great job, and I'm very happy with what they've been able to do to kind of pick up the pieces from a card that blew up.
Yeah, so speaking of that, we're going to get into it now. We're going to get into the main event. Henry Cejudo taking on Song Yadong. It's a 5-round fight. This one's interesting because this one kind of came out of left field. We didn't really know what the future of Henry Cejudo's career was going to look like, and now he's officially back in the UFC. What do you think?
I mean, Cejudo is he's still Henry Cejudo. I think a lot of people are forgetting that, people have brought it up now, but his last fight against Merab was a very close decision. He did lose rounds 2 and 3, but he won the first round on all 3 judges' scorecards. He had Merab rocked and hurt pretty bad. And then in the fight before that, he fought Aljamain Sterling and arguably won that fight. It was a split decision, and I thought that watching in person at the event, I did think Cejudo did enough to win the fight. I know some people at home watching felt different. In the arena, I know a lot of people in my section also agreed that Cejudo won the fight, and we were surprised when Aljamain got the decision. So it was pretty interesting to see all the kind of like writing off of Henry Cejudo that's been done.
I actually thought at the very least that you could have given the fight a draw. I didn't think Cejudo won, but I thought it was close.
Yeah, no, and it's fine. But at the same time, it's just like he's still a top level fighter at bantamweight, and I feel like a lot of people are just thinking like, oh, Song Yadong's gonna win, and that's that. Like I think Cejudo is very capable of winning this fight. He doesn't get knocked out really ever. It's very rare that we see. Like, when have we ever seen Cejudo like put out cold like that? We haven't, and I mean, don't get me wrong, Song Yadong could beat him up for a couple rounds, but is he really going to be able to avoid Henry's wrestling for 5 rounds? It is an interesting question.
Is he going to be able to sustain 5 rounds against the biggest name in the sport that he's ever fought? I don't know.
It's an interesting question, you know. I just don't think this fight is as cut and dry as, oh, Henry Cejudo's on the way out and Song Yadong's on the way up. Like, we've seen Song Yadong lose. He's not some super robot, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. I feel like Cejudo's being written off a little too heavily in this fight, and like, now that I say it out loud, I'm honestly leaning towards picking him to win this fight, because I do think his wrestling is still top level, and I just think he's being overlooked a bit too much. I like Song Yadong a lot, but I don't know if he has the wrestling defense to really stop Cejudo from doing what he wants to him.
No, and unfortunately, I don't think Song Yudong looked very good in his last fight against Peter Yan, and you have to go all the way back to September of 2022 when he fought a name as close to similar to Henry Cejudo as you can get in Corey Sandhagen. So the experience factor really does go to Cejudo here, and I actually don't think Cejudo finishes him, but I think he wins a comfortable decision, 49-46. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I could actually see Cejudo picking up the decision here. I don't know. This is a weird one, because Song is tough to finish in his own right too. You know, he's not an easy guy to finish. So I don't know if this fight will end by finish. If it does, I do favor Song. If you told me this fight was going to be finished, I would think Song probably gets it done. But I don't know. I don't see him like flatlining Cejudo. This could age horribly. You know, this could age horribly. But I just don't see him flatlining Cejudo, and I don't know if he has what it takes to beat him over 5 rounds either. So I am going to lean Henry Cejudo by decision as well for now, but I don't know. Maybe that could change, but I think I like Cejudo in this fight.
Yeah, and now taking a look at the co-main event, it's another fight that I don't think is getting as much attention as it probably should, but I think it's obviously worth going over. We've got Brendan Allen taking on Anthony Hernandez, and this is one of those fights between two guys to where I think each guy is in a must-win situation, because I feel like this is a middleweight wild card fight of sorts. What do you think?
This is a wild card fight. I mean, we've already seen it happen in LFA a couple of years ago. Anthony Hernandez and Brendan Allen did fight, and Anthony Hernandez got the win. But at the same time, Brendan Allen was just a lot less polished than he is now. He was not as polished as he is. It's very interesting to see a rematch that wasn't in the UFC for the first fight between now top level UFC guys. It's pretty rare.
It's a good point.
I feel like it's pretty rare fights like this. So I'm very intrigued to see if Brendan Allen over the years has made enough changes and done enough that now 7 years later he can beat Anthony Hernandez. You know, it's been a long time since that first fight. So it's going to be interesting, especially because I know a lot of people really are high on Anthony Hernandez and think he has the makings to be a potential title challenger and future champion. This fight is going to tell us a lot about that. And the only 2 times Hernandez has lost, he's been finished. So it is going to be interesting to see if Brendan Allen could finish him, because if it goes to a decision, I don't know. The 3-round nature of this fight makes it hard, because when they fought the first time, I'm pretty sure it was a 5-round fight for the LFA middleweight title. So that fight being 5 rounds and now this one being 3 does feel a bit weird.
Pat, it sure was. You're right. It was a title fight.
Yeah, so it's weird. Like, I don't know what to think about this fight. They're both grapple heavy, but they both are more than competent on the feet. Like, it really just depends on where this fight takes place. But I mean, with the streak that Anthony Hernandez has been on, I mean, what is it now? 3 6-fight win streak. You know, he's on the 6-fight win streak against good competition, like very good competition. I don't know. It really. This fight has me split a bit, and I think I lean Anthony Hernandez just because he did win that first showing, but at the same time, I shouldn't be picking him because of a fight that happened 7 years ago. I don't know. What do you think about this one? Because this one has me in a really like weird spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think no matter who you pick, it's one of these coin flip fights where you just don't know. And I really think that Brendan Allen, one of his few losses only being to Nasruddin Imamov is nothing to sweat at. And I just think overall experience is experience, and I think that Brendan Allen has fought better competition than Anthony Hernandez since their fight 7 years ago, and because of that, and because of Allen's experience fighting in more high profile fights than Hernandez to this point. It makes me want to lean the other way and pick Brendan Allen. So that's why I'm going with tentatively. I could be wrong and switch to the Hernandez side, but I think either way, I think this fight over delivers and then some. And I actually think this fight could steal the entire card. No, oh, no disrespect to the main event or anything like that. You just sometimes don't know what Henry Cejudo you're going to get. So, I can say very conservatively that I think that this fight will be one of the best fights on the entire card. And honestly, I'm going to go one step further and say I think this will be one of the best fights in all of Q1 in the UFC period. So hopefully it delivers.
Yeah, no, I think this fight definitely has all the makings of a fight that should and will deliver, because I think both of these guys have good cardio. Like they match up very, very well against each other. And we've seen that in the past. The grappling exchanges in that first fight were really fun. So I hope we get some more of those really fun grappling exchanges, reversals, and all that. Like I really want to just see what we saw in the first fight. The first fight between them was really interesting. So I hope it's just similar, but different enough, I guess.
For sure. And then just overall, before we kind of wrap up, just on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for UFC Seattle? And for those that are maybe on the fence of watching a fight night card that I don't think has gotten the buzz it probably deserves, what should fans expect, in your opinion, that maybe they weren't looking out for at first?
Fans should expect war. A lot of these matchups are really good, and this card is still one of the better fight nights of the entire year so far. It probably is the best. Just looking at it right now, it probably is the best fight night we've gotten this year. Even after all the cancellations, pullouts, rebookings, all of it, this card is still incredible. It features a bunch of very entertaining prospects, and along with a mix of like savvy vets. Like, I don't know, this card is really good to me, and this is one of the more excited cards one of the more excited times I've been for a card this year. Oh, you're on mute.
Or I said, I don't know. I don't know if I'm excited as you. I feel like I was more excited for the UFC Saudi Arabia fight night card. But if there are a couple fights that take the cake, by the time this one's over, I think I would more than likely agree with you. But that remains to be seen. So
yeah, we'll find out. I mean, I really think this card has potential to be really good, though.
For sure. So that's going to do it for episode 115 of the MMA Outsiders. From Zain Bando, for Pat, Danna to my right. Thank you again for tuning in. And before we get out of here, Pat, is there anything you'd like to tease for episode 116, or anything just on the horizon that you or I have going on that fans should be looking forward to later on in the month at all? What do you think?
No teasers unless you pay for the Substack.
very, very, very good point. Which, speaking of the Substack, because I actually forgot to go ahead and populate it. But please be sure to check out our Substack again. It's only $5 a month. You can go to etbnetwork.substack.com. It'll populate in just a second, and that is where you will find pretty much everything that I guess would be considered all of the extra content, if you will. It's all going to be right there. So etbnetwork.substack.com. You can go check it out, whether that's Pat Danna's weird NFL stats, whether that's Grant Linsauer's weekly NFL news stories, Nick DiMartino's leftover segment or unnecessary wagers, or Will Charlton's noteworthy in the NCAA. It's there. So until then, be sure to keep it locked in here for more episodes of the MMA Outsiders. And before we get out of here, just as a quick reminder, the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. Have a good one, everyone.
Have a good one, everyone.